Welcome back, everybody. It's been a few months since I was last here, courtesy of taking on a new job, which has chewed into my hobby time substantially. But we're back here, and today we're taking a look at Liquitex's Modeling Paste. Now, I tripped across this when I happened to be watching a Vince Venturella video, and he was talking about using airbrush, medium, and flow aid. So I thought, you know what, I haven't had any of that, I haven't used it, I might as well go out and get some. In the process of doing so, I came across this stuff, and I thought, you know what, that seems like something that could be fun to play with. Maybe we should have a go and see how practical it is in the modeling hobby world. And first things first, perhaps try using it as a basing medium. Now, in the past, I've used coffee and mixed that with some form of adhesive, typically something like Mod Podge, and that works really well. You can mix sand in there, and the whole thing sticks relatively well. And for this instance, I thought, okay, well, let's get some of this out and try and build up a base and see how practical it is as a high build to physically create some surface on the structure and also hopefully adhere elements onto the base that can be then used. And so I thought, well, we'll start with a little bit of bark, pine bark, to build up some artificial rocks. And it's relatively easy to apply. It's a little bit gooey. I just use the palette knife or the cutter, and you can certainly play around with it and move it. It is quite soft and squishy, and it dries relatively quickly out of the pot. Typically, once it's spread out, it's probably gone hard in about 3 to 5 minutes, and that's at an average room temperature of about 22 degrees. So it doesn't take particularly long for it to actually harden. So recommendation, put the lid back on when you're using it and definitely seal it tight. Have our little guy here, a little grip guard, and I'm going to see if this will physically work as an adhesive to stick his feet onto the bark to save introducing other elements further down the track. And so this was a bit of an exercise to see if it was going to work. Leave it sit around for a while, and oh no, it doesn't work at all. So clearly it doesn't really adhere to the plastic particularly great, and so the best thing to do is just scrape that off. You can see it's still a little bit soft where it hasn't got any air. Maybe if I'd left it a little bit longer it may have worked, but as you can see, even the bark is lifting off, and therefore not the best option perhaps. So I've come along and just slathered the whole thing in Mod Podge, and that tends to work as a skin to secure it all to the base. So that certainly works better. And then just resort to your conventional super glue to stick your little chap back on. That seems to be the best way. Now, given its texture and its viscosity, I thought perhaps it could be good to use as modeling, as in shaping as well. So with this little Neurogaunt, you can see that he comes on a partial base which has some spiky bits sticking up in the air. And what I noticed when playing with this was that it seems to hold a point, a bit like whipped cream. And so slathering it onto the base and then using a toothpick, you can actually mold it, play with it, and draw it up into peaks to sort of create a texture that sort of emulates the shape of the spikes that are on the base that come with the model. And it doesn't take too long to do. You've got enough working time, like I said, 3 to 5 minutes to play around with it is sufficient to do the job. That one there I tried doing initially with the model attached to work around it because the base was so wide. This one had a smaller touching point, so I thought I'd go a bit crazy and see just how tall the peaks you could lift up, and you can clearly see that you can go in and add additional afterwards. So you can certainly get creative with how you want it to look, and it gives you a reasonable result. I'm sure you could make it look like waves in water or perhaps even flames, but this one here we just went with sort of projections, spiky projections, like something that's been burnt or melted. And so it seemed like a reasonable approach to take. Sticking our little Neurogaunt on, we then just undercoated him and the whole thing. Now in this instance here, this hasn't been Mod Podged. This is just putting the primer straight over the modeling paste, just to see if the paint itself will also help keep everything together. And spoiler alert, no it doesn't. As it turns out, despite the fact that it does dry relatively quickly, and to some extent it does stick to the base, I have found that the fine points that you put on tend to be a little bit brittle. But that's something you just have to work around. But we've decided to give these a go and put a little bit of paint on them, and I've chosen to use Speed Paint 1.0. So here I've used Cloudburst Blue, and I've diluted it with the Speed Paint Medium to sort of knock it back a bit, and then used Elven Armor, which is a metallic, just to brighten up the peak. So just dry brush that on just to give it a bit of sparkle at the tips to make it look like it's some sort of crystalline structure. But as you can see, it doesn't have a huge contrast, so I've decided to go in with a purple ink. And because this is going over Speed Paint 1.0 and I've deliberately added it as a very wet sort of medium, you can see that already where it's touching in certain spots, the color is changing to more a blue-purple as it mixes with the blue. That ends up giving you a really nice progressive gradient rather than having a contrast or a stark transition. So lucky me, using the old stuff works well. Clearly if you don't have that, you could try wet blending or something like that, but in the end it doesn't look too bad once it dries, because you do get that nice sort of sheen. And finishing off, just going in with a lighter color just to pick out the tips, and it really sort of brings out the shape on the base, which looks actually quite nice. And then ultimately it's just pop your little model on and see how he looks. And I've done that with a few, and just to give you a bit of an idea of what it can look like at the end, we've put a couple of little Neurogants onto there, and you can see that the spikes on the plastic kind of blend in relatively well if you pick it up, so you do get a sort of a uniform appearance across the base. So rather happy with how that modeling paste actually works, but yeah, word of caution, just be very cautious with the strength or how hard it is. Don't throw them around, because you will find that you will chip and break potentially, but it seems to be not a bad product. So that's the end of today's little instructive video. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope to catch you in the next one. Thank you.